Lord, we're thankful for the privilege of having your final revelation in the Greek language. We ask that you would be glorified in this class time, that it would be edifying to the students. You help me as I teach. Bless those that might watch the video later. We pray that you would equip the students as we make progress in this second half of the text to grow in their skill in the language, grow in their love for you, grow in their ability to use your word effectively for your glory. And we pray this in Jesus' name, amen. Oxia securiae labenten doxon kai tentem kai tendunamen patis ectisas tapanta kai dia tavelemasu esikai ectis thesan Oxion este tarnean ta es phagmenon laben te dunamen kai pluton kai sophion kai eskun kai timin kai doxon kai eulogion estes ionoston ionon. Amen. All right, very good. So let me congratulate you for getting to chapter 21. That is very exciting. And you are more than halfway already, and that is very good. And verbs are great things. You can't do anything without them. So let's go to the workbook, and we're going to start working our way through BBG 21 here. I'm going to try to keep my numbers in Greek, and I'd encourage you to try to do that as well. And then if we mention books of the Bible, I'm going to try to say those in Greek as well. So for example, here, 1 through 10 in the parsing is heis, dua, trace, tesseres, penta, hex, hepta, octo, enea, deca. All right. 1 through 10 are on 125 of the third edition. And then you have the ordinals on 127. And then on 131, you have 11 through 20. So if it helps you, go ahead and stick a gospel tract on those pages. And that will be fine. So we can stay in language a little bit more. Does anybody want to try heis?
Abaptizes. Is that how you pronounce that?
Abaptizes.
Abaptizes. I said it's second person singular, imperfect, active, indicative. The lexical form is baptid, and the inflected meaning is you were baptizing. Second person singular, imperfect, active, indicative. The lexical form is baptid, and the inflected meaning is you were baptizing.
Okay. Agathos or kakos?
Ooh.
Ooh, okay, ooh.
Okay. On the lexical form.
Lexical form. Okay, so what do you think the lexical form is?
I got baptizo.
I wrote the stem.
Oh, right. Yeah. So you actually, it's good you're thinking about stems and roots. That's very good. But the lexical form is baptizo. If you tried to look up baptid, you wouldn't find anything. You would find baptizo. So, but in a way, that's kind of a good error because it shows that you're thinking about those roots, which are very nice and very important. And then you were baptizing is fine. Of course, you want to distinguish between you singular and you plural somehow. You said it was second singular, so obviously you mean you singular. You could also say thou wert baptizing if you want to be a little bit old-fashioned. All right, Yuga, agathos, very good. How about duo?
I can do that one.
All
A
right.
kuon, it could be first singular or third person plural because of the N ending, and you would go by context
The
to
N? What's an N?
new.
Oh, new. Okay. All right.
And then it's active indicative. The lexical form is akuo, and it's I/they heard or were hearing.
Okay. So I think you said first singular or third plural, active indicative. Did you say it was imperfect?
I put down it's the secondary tense.
Oh, okay. Okay. So first singular or third plural, a secondary tense, active indicative, akuo. How did you give the inflected meaning?
I was hearing or they were hearing.
All right. Eucharistosa. Nai eu.
Nine.
Nai. Okay. Got one nai. Do you agree?
You said it was in the imperfect?
So yeah, let's talk about that. For the tense, it was said that it was a secondary tense instead of imperfect. What do you all think of that?
Aren't both secondary and primary tense imperfect?
What do you all think about that?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, yes,
Imperfect is secondary or
it would
primary
be
tense?
secondary. It is secondary.
Okay.
The form is secondary because of the epsilon before, or in this case, it's the eta.
Okay. Okay. You've convinced somebody that it's a secondary tense. Okay. Well, that's good.
Imperfect is a subset of secondary tenses.
Okay. Imperfect is a subset of secondary tenses. Oh, okay.
I would presume, which may be a little ambitious on my part, that there will be more secondary tenses coming.
Oh, okay. Maybe there are more. Now, at this point, the imperfect is the only secondary tense that you know. Okay. I think look at the master verb chart for a second. I have it up here. This is in the back. This should be page 354. And of course, at this point, the only part of the master verb chart you have down is the present and the imperfect. Now, of course, you could say, well, a lot of my Greek is imperfect, and that might be the case. That's a different use of the word imperfect. So now, well, you know the future too. Okay, so you know the future as well. So notice on the master verb chart, it says the future uses primary active endings. The present uses primary active, primary middle passive for the present middle passive. And then you have sec, meaning secondary, for the imperfect active, and secondary middle passive for the imperfect. We had a good suggestion there. We're going to learn some more tenses that have secondary endings. So when you learn the aorists, they will also have secondary endings. And so you are correct that it is not just the imperfect that has secondary endings. So on page 187 here. So here, 21.14, you now know the 4 sets of personal endings. So primary tenses will use the primary endings, the sigma, iota, menta, nc, or the mai, psi, tai, meta, esta, ntai, right? And then secondary tenses will use nu, sigma, nothing, menta, nu in the active, or main, sa, ta, meta, esta, nta in the middle passive. So the imperfect does take, it is a secondary tense, and it does take these endings. And at this point, it's the only secondary tense that you know, but he does say all other tenses uses endings, which kind of implies that there may be more coming for you. Okay. So in a way that, if you're parsing it, you would want to say for the tense, you'd want to say that it's imperfect instead of saying it's a secondary tense. I mean, it is a secondary tense, but the tense would be imperfect. But in a way, that was also a good mistake, because that was actually helpful to point that out. So thank you for that, for pointing that out, secondary versus primary endings. Just like we had roots versus lexical forms. So that was also useful, actually, in making that for duos. For this one, it'd be first singular or third plural, imperfect active indicative, akuo, I was hearing or they were hearing. Why is it either first singular or third plural? I mean, shouldn't the form be one or the other?
Because the personal endings are the same for the first person singular and the third person plural.
Yuga, yes, very good. So the new is either one. And so it would be context in a sentence that would tell you. And the large majority of the time, it's really not that hard to tell if you have a paragraph, whether it's a group of people or where it's I. But just in something like this, you wouldn't know. All right, Yuga, let's go to trace. And whoever didn't do either haste or do I don't remember who did what, but please do trace.
All right, that'll be me. Athalete, second person, singular, imperfect, active, indicative, lexical form, thelo, you were wishing.
Okay, second singular, imperfect active indicative, thelo, you were wishing. Nai eu?
No.
Nai, okay, we got a
Or
nai.
ooh. I'm
Or
sorry.
ooh.
I always get nigh. I always think nigh is no.
Nai sounds like no. Yeah, it's tricky.
That always throws me off. It's plural, not singular,
It's plural and singular. Why?
because of the ending, the te ending. It's plural.
Oh, okay. The te ending. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good sign there. Yep, so we've got that te here, te. And so what ending would it have were it singular instead of plural?
Sigma.
Sigma, yuga, all right. Yuga, so they're very good. So that is second plural, imperfect active indicative, thelo, and ye were willing or wishing, something like that. Some people think there's a distinction between will or wish as thelo and will or wish with bulimai, and there might be, I don't know for sure, but just some people think there is, some people think there isn't. You can study it out for yourself and tell me what you figure out. All right, Yuga, let's go to thesaurus.
All right. Esozestha.
Esozestha.
Esozestha. Second person plural, imperfect, middle indicative. The lexical form is sozo, and you were being saved. It's an inflected meaning.
All right, agathos, a kakos. One agathos. Two agathoses. All right. Very good. Now, let me just ask you this from this chapter. So he says you now know the 4 sets of personal endings. And he gives you the middle passive voice here, main, sa, ta, metha, esta, nta. Now he says active voice and middle / passive voice. And so is there any difference in the ending if it's middle or if it's passive? No, there is not. Ooh. So actually, you would want to say that this one, esozesta, you'd want to say it's a second plural imperfect middle / passive indicative. Now, in a particular sentence, it would be the one or the other. And at this point, you haven't even encountered any real middles. All you have is deponent middles at this point. Okay. How did you translate it?
You were being baptized, or you were being saved.
You were being baptized. Whoa, he's become a Campbellite. You're being baptized and saved. All right. You were being saved. So you translated it as a passive. So you were being saved is fine as a passive. Middle is somehow be reflecting back on yourself, like you were saving yourself. So, which I guess would be Campbellism,
Yeah,
probably. But
yeah, it was kind of weird. I was having a hard time figuring out the inflected meaning, how to word that.
Yeah. So I would say that was fine. You were being saved. Probably it's a passive, okay? Especially since you haven't had any real middles yet that you've encountered. That's going to be a few chapters down the road. So yeah, you were being saved. It was perfectly legitimate inflected meaning. All right, Yuga, let's try penta.
I have it down as epoie, third person singular, imperfect active indicative. Poieo is the lexical form, and I have it down as he / she / it was doing or was making.
All right, third singular imperfect active indicative, poieo, he, she, it was doing or making. Agathos e kakos.
You go.
Yuga, okay, all right. You have a yuga?
Agathos.
Agathos, all right. Yes, I agree. So agathos, very good for that. All right, let's go to hex.
Exabales.
Exebolus.
Exabolus. No, exabolus.
Exebolus, yeah.
Okay. Exabolus.
All those Koine Greek speakers you might meet around town, you have to make sure you're doing it right for them.
Well, and the trick is not throwing in the Spanish pronunciation.
And you know, we're pronouncing things a certain way, but if you think about how Koine Greek was a Weltsprache, a world language, the likelihood that everybody pronounced it exactly the same way is very low. Just think about how English is pronounced so many different ways. And actually, you can see in that different pronunciations may actually count for some textual variation in certain manuscripts. So they might have pronounced things differently, and that could contribute to some spelling mistakes that are in some manuscripts. So somebody probably said it exactly the way you said it, but we're going to say it as exebolus. So, okay, go ahead.
Second person singular, imperfect, active, indicative. The lexical form, I got ekbalo, and you were casting out.
Okay, second singular imperfect active indicative, ekbalo, you were casting out. Agathos e kakos.
You said imperfect active indicative?
Yeah.
Yep. You go.
Yuga, all right, Yuga. Have you gone through these and compared your answers with the answer key?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you notice in the answer key it said 1, 2 for the person case column? It's a mistake. I just wanted to point out that for some, at least the answer key that I have, which was probably one you have because I sent it to you, for the person / case column says 1, 2, but the verb is second person, not either first or second person. So I think that's just a typo in the answer key. So it's second person singular. Imperfect active indicative. So you are correct. You go.
So there's no 12th person in the Greek?
No 12th person. No, that
Okay.
the language is simpler than that. And so there might be 12 people, but not 12 different ways to put things. So 12 apostles, but not 12 different new forms learned. So that's really nice.
Okay, sorry, dodeca.
Oh yes, dodeca. Yes, thank you. Yes, yes. When I was a kid, I made this. I made this big thing with many sides. It was a rhombi iso dodecahedron. That's how many sides it had, and my mom hung it up in the garage. I don't even remember how many sides it was, but that's a lot to have a rhombi iso dodecahedron. But let's go to hepta.
Hepta. Hassan. And that is third person plural, imperfect active indicative. Lexical form is me, and inflected meaning is they were.
All right, Ason, third plural imperfect active indicative, me, they were. Agathos e kakos.
Agathos.
Agathos. All right. Yuga, that is correct. All right, very good. Let's go to Octo.
Eparua main, first person singular, imperfect, mid or passive indicative. The lexical form is eperotao, and it was I was being asked.
Okay, all right. Na eu. Octo.
Like octopus.
Octo. Yeah, like an octopus. Yes, yes. Those are amazing creatures.
So, I got what the answer key said does not agree with what Amber gave.
The answer key. Oh, well, maybe the answer you had typos again. I mean, what did so? Okay, Adolphe Amber, can you read your answer again, please?
Yeah, I might have picked a different verb that just looked similar.
Oh, okay.
When you add all those prefixes and personal suffixes, it gets wonky.
Yeah, I have a
Mm.
really hard time distinguishing my vocabulary.
Like when you say distinguishing the vocabulary, do you mean? Can you explain? What do you mean by that? Can you explain?
Recognizing the words with all of the what do you call it, the words at the beginning and the way that inflects with vowels
Okay.
with the new case endings. It just
Okay.
seemed like a lot of change for one chapter.
Ah, yeah. Well, you do have a different set of endings. You have this augment at the front, so
yeah,
I can see how it is new. It is new, and also this is first chapter for second semester. So, but I think you're gonna get, and English doesn't do something like that. It doesn't stick an augment on the front. It does stick an ed at the end of things at the back sometimes, but I think you're going to get used to it. Just you can't assume that an epsilon at the front is always the first letter of the vocabulary word, and that's just something you're gonna have to keep in mind. But I think as you see these and start using them, I think it's not going to be that bad. But in a way, so yeah. So here I think there was a suggestion that maybe this word was confused with a different verb. What did you say the lexical form was?
I had said that it was eperotao.
Eperotao. Okay. All right. Eperotao. Could it be from eperotao?
It doesn't look like it
No.
upon
Now,
closer inspection.
yeah, the epsilon at the front, yes, but then you got this row in there and all this other stuff. So probably not from eperotao. Okay. Do you have any other ideas on the fly? Does it look like anything else? If that epsilon's an augment, do we have something after that epsilon that maybe looks like a word that maybe is familiar?
No, it looks like alphabet soup.
Looks like alphabet soup. Oh, okay. All right. Well, what alternative lexical form do we have here?
With it being deponent, poretumai.
Paruamai.
That was my
Paruamai.
second guess.
Okay, here we go. So yeah, so Paruamai, that was page 155, which would have been chapter 18. Paruamai. And notice he even is nice enough to give you the eparuamen here. Now that eparuamen, that sure looks a lot like octo, doesn't it?
Pretty close anyway.
Is it just pretty close?
That's the same.
It's exactly the same. Okay, so what does it have to be if it's from paruamai, and here this is eparuamen?
Lexical form would need to be that poretumai.
Sure. So the lexical form is paruamai, and what is this form here? What is eparuamen?
Imperfect.
Imperfect. What person? What number?
First singular.
Well, these are all first singular. So this parusamai. What's that? What is parusamai?
Future.
Future. What person and number?
Singular.
First singular. How would you translate
Mine.
parusamai?
That's first person singular.
Yeah, you got it. So it's first singular. And so parusamai would mean?
I will come.
I will go. So this is I
will
will
go.
go. This is I was going. This is I am going. And these are things we don't need to worry about yet. All right.
Yeah, I'm learning it'll help if you memorize those.
Yeah. So here, I'd say probably just having that vocabulary word down will help, it not turn into alphabet soup.
So when we're memorizing vocabulary, is it required that we memorize those different forms?
So the large majority of grammars, when they give you something like this, they'll tell you just memorize all these tense forms right away, or they're going to call them principal parts. So they're going to say learn this whole thing right away. Mounce kind of is saying, why learn these when you don't even know what they mean yet? And I can see that there can be something to that. You don't even know what these mean yet. But he's going to have you, once you learn this, like this is the perfect, he's actually going to have you learn this and kind of fill in what you didn't learn from before when you do. So I would suggest on vocabulary cards, sticking them all on there. And you're certainly not losing out if you memorize it all right now, because you're going to have to when you learn what these forms are. So at this point, just through this chapter, this is all you're going to see. You're going to see, you want to know the root, the present tense, the lexical form, and these ones.
So, but you're saying like you have to learn, like for what we're doing now with perfect middle, we have to learn that form.
Yeah, well, now, so the imperfect
I'm
form,
looking at Peruamai, and now after going through the chapter, it's easier to recognize.
Yes.
Without memorizing that, but you're saying we still need to memorize it.
Well, the reason the imperfect is in the brackets is, remember, the imperfect is from the present tense stem. So actually, if you memorize the present, you pretty much always can figure out what the imperfect is. At least if it's like a contract verb, there might be some contractions, but you should be able to always get from the present tense to the imperfect. And that's why it's in brackets. And that's actually why, like if you were memorizing the tense forms, you could skip the imperfect and just memorize the present, the future, perfect, aorist, passive, whatever other ones it has, and not necessarily the imperfect. So this maybe is a little bit optional. And if you can just always reproduce the imperfect from the present tense stem, you're going to be okay. But you're also, if you just want to memorize it with it, that's certainly going to be fine as well. You want to do what you can do so that you're always able to successfully, figure out what it is when you see it in a Greek sentence.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd say about that. I'd say most of the time you probably don't have to memorize the imperfects because you can derive them from the presents, but it's not going to hurt you to do it. And it could help you. And some of the other ones where there can be changes, then you're going to want to. Some of them are different, not as easy to determine. So yeah, that was a good question. And so good. So that was par UMI. And so this was a par UAmain for singular imperfect. Now, did you all say it was middle/passive? Yes. Yes. Okay. Now,
I did originally.
I didn't originally.
Not originally.
Say that.
But now you did. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, there's a difference between esozesthe up here is middle/passive in its form. Par UAmain is not either middle or passive. The form is a middle or passive form. But tell me, what's the difference in the lexical form for esozesthe and par UAmain? What's the difference in the endings on that lexical form?
So the lexical form for tesseres is sozo. So it's your standard first person active endings. Whereas for octo, it uses the passive endings instead of the active endings.
Oh, okay. So the lexical form is par UMI. It's not par UO. It's par UMI. And the lexical form for esozesthe is sozo, not sozomai. So what does that tell us about par UMI? That the lexical form has a mi on it instead of an omega.
Deponent.
Deponent. You got. So since it's deponent, you would want to say it's a first singular imperfect middle deponent indicative. Like if you're using like a Bible software program and you wanted to search for something, you wouldn't type in deponent because that's actually a category of the middle. But I would say for parsing these, go ahead, if it's deponent, stick that word deponent in there, because now you know epar doesn't have a passive sense or a middle sense. It just has an active sense with those middle endings, middle passive endings. So this would be a first singular imperfect middle deponent indicative from par UMI, and it means I was going, not somehow I was going for myself with like a middle, or I was being gone, or I don't know. I don't even know how you put it in the passive, something like that. But so that actually is, I think that's helpful. So if it's deponent, you're fine just saying middle deponent. But then if it's actually an active, where the form has those middle passive endings, for the imperfect, say it's middle / passive, and then the context will tell you, is this passive, you know, you were being saved, or, you know, whatever else. Okay, you good. Does anybody have any questions about that? Any questions about octo? Nine, well, let's go to Aneta.
All right. So I guess that would be me. I'll give you what I originally got for the sake of discussion. What I originally got was third person singular imperfect active indicative, and I completely blanked originally on the lexical form and inflected meaning.
You go.
So he's saying you did a good job in blanking out. I guess it makes him feel good.
Well, I did the same thing, so I had to
Yeah.
look up the word.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to look it up too. I figured just reading the answer key wouldn't be interesting.
Okay. Now, the most of these are imperfect because this is the imperfect chapter, but he has to make, if he had them all imperfect, then you wouldn't have to have your thinking caps on. So this one isn't imperfect. And this is actually a good example of how knowing those tense forms can be helpful. Anybody get a lexical form here for this hex, Susie?
It's echo.
Echo, okay. Echo. Let's find that. Oops.
Yeah, the sigma should have been the giveaway as far as tense.
Yeah, with
The
the
sigma.
whenever I don't or can't figure something out, I usually try to solve the problem with the textbook and use the answer key as last resort.
Yes, good.
Like with that one, once I
Yuga.
figured out it was echo, I could figure the answer out.
Yuga, yes. The answer key is not supposed to be, I don't know what to do, I'll just look at the answer key. That is not what you want to do. The answer key is once you're done, then you figure out your mistakes. So yes, the workbook is supposed to be, to an extent as much as possible, like you're taking a test where you don't have an answer key. So,
Well,
even
the C I wasn't getting to echo, so
yeah, I usually look up the words in the back of, if I don't know the word, I look up the word in the textbook, and that usually helps me.
yes, that is a good suggestion. So
Yeah,
here's
I
echo.
I tried that, but the Kasi and Anaya, I wasn't getting from the Kasi back to a Kai, so, or key.
Oh, yeah. So you wasn't going from the key to the C. Now, what's the tense formative for the future?
Sigma.
Sigma. So why did we go from key to C?
The square stops.
Ooh, the square of stops. Yes. Now, that makes this really have a sigma inside of its tummy. Okay. But the epsilon to the rough breathing, the ek to the heck, that is something where that's not going to be easy to see why it's doing that. Now he gives this explanation in the present tense. Actually, he says that certain things happened, it went away, and this weird stuff happened. But this is a good example of where memorizing the tense forms or principal parts is very helpful. Because if you memorized echo in the imperfect achon in the future hexo, okay, now you know hexo right away. So this is one where having those tense forms is certainly very helpful. And I would say, especially if it does something weird, it was especially helpful to make sure you memorize the tense forms. And again, many grammars just say memorize them all right away as soon as you learn the word, even if you don't have a clue what this other stuff back here is yet. But the problem is, if you don't use it, you're not gonna keep it. But so echo does this weird thing to become hexo in the future, and once you know that, now I think it's pretty easy. So if you know we've got hexo, what's that usi on hexusi?
So that'd be a third person plural ending.
Third person plural ending, yeah. So then we've got ourselves a third plural future active indicative from echo, which means
They will have.
they will have. Yuga. Yeah, so he's stuck in a tricky one for you. Though, is usi a primary or secondary ending?
It's primary.
Primary ending, right?
It's a primary ending. Yeah. So that's also a hint that you're not in the imperfect. Though it's sometimes, I understand it's easier after the fact once you already know what it is. Oh, yeah, of course that's what it is. But that is a hint that it's actually not imperfect. All right, Yuga. Let's go to Deca.
Epeirotone. And I said it was first person singular imperfect active indicative. The lexical form is a pepota. I don't think I even wrote that right.
Just go syllable by syllable. Ep, er, o,
Epeirotao.
Eperotao. Yeah.
And
Eperotao.
the inflected meaning was I was asking.
All right. First singular imperfect active indicative, eperotao. I was asking. Agathos e kakos.
I would say that's correct for first singular, but there's a second tense possible.
Third person plural.
Okay, it could also be third person plural, because remember that new ending is ambiguous. Okay, so yes, that Yuga. And what is this? How can we have an omega right in front of that new ending? What kind of verb is this?
Is it a contract verb?
Contract verb, Yuga. Because remember the lexical form, eperotao. So if it's got that ao, eo, a-o, so alpha, omega, epsilon, omega, or omicron, omega, those are your contract verbs. So this is what happened in 21.22. You've got the paradigm there for the imperfect contracts. And so as an alpha contract, it does the same thing as agapao in 21.22. So that's why you have that omega there before the new. So Yuga, very good for Deca there. All right, any questions?
It's not a genitive noun. Got it.
No. Now, I could see how it could look like one, though.
Yeah.
That could look like a genitive noun, couldn't it? All right. It's not getting cold yet out here. Actually, in San Francisco, we kind of have a late summer. So June isn't that warm. That's why Mark Twain says that the coldest, the coldest winter ever had a summer in San Francisco, which means he never went to North Dakota. But in any case, we kind of get it in September instead. So September, it's nice and warm. But if you aren't warm, we are going to warm up now. And that will be good. I'm going to say haste to trace again for these. Okay, let's go to haste.
Ebaptizen. autus, I baptized them, or I was baptizing them.
Tus, I baptized them, or I was baptizing them. Okay. Nai eu,
No.
nai. Okay. Everyone nai.
Well, I wrote I was baptizing them the first time, and then the workbook said, or the answer key said, he was baptizing them.
Okay.
I originally
So
said they were baptizing them, but the workbook said he.
they were baptizing them. I was baptizing them. He was baptizing them.
At least somebody was
Oh.
baptized.
Somebody was. Somebody was. Maybe it was like one of those like a 1, 2, 3 pray after me. They baptize you in the back of the bus and give you a candy bar, and somebody else does it next week. Keep the statistics up. Okay, so let's, and that of course does not please God very much. So the ebaptizen here, how do we know? Is it first person? Is it?
It ends in the
third
new, so
plural?
it should be first person singular or third person plural. So I don't know where the workbook got, or the answer key got the second person singular from.
Okay, so it ends in a new. Okay, so this is good. So we've got, look on 21.14. So here are our endings here. So you've done very well for noticing that the ending, you've got a new ending for the first person and for the third person plural, first singular, third person plural. But then I think it was Adolphus Jody said that there's a movable new for that can show up or not show up on a third singular. So what's the difference between the first person, the third person, plural, and the third person singular, if there is a movable new? What's the difference?
Our cases where it would typically end in new, there's an omicron. So omicron new for first person singular and third person plural. Whereas the third person singular, there's an epsilon there.
Oh, okay. What is this omicron, epsilon, epsilon, omicron, epsilon, omicron? What is that?
Connecting vowels.
Oh, connecting vowels. Aha. Okay, so if it's first singular and third plural, we've got ourselves a nice omicron connecting vowel. If it's third singular, we've got an epsilon connecting vowel. So over here, ebaptizen, what's before that new?
Epsilon.
Ooh, epsilon. Okay. So then what is this new? Is this new an ending, or is it a
Movable new.
It's a movable new. That is tricky, isn't it? Tricky, tricky. So that's why it is third singular, because it's actually ebaptiza with a movable new stuck on it. So it is actually he, she, or it, and probably he, right? He was baptizing them. What would I was baptizing them be? What would be the difference?
Baptizon.
You get ebaptizon, autus, ebaptizon with an omicron. So you get, so there, that was a little tricky, but it's good that we pointed that out. And obviously the more like you don't want to just rely on context, because you want to understand why forms are doing what they're doing. But context probably would help you a lot. So, it would probably lend you towards thinking it's one or the other. But you guys, so that's why it's actually imperfect active indicative third singular from baptizo, and it's he was baptizing them. All right, you got any questions on haste here?
I see that in the TR there's a TR variation. I didn't see your email until I had already done the workbook when you sent that last email out. But
That's
I'm looking at it.
understandable. Since I sent the email out not that long before class, I am thankful that you did not just do it afterwards.
Well,
So
the
good job.
last couple additionals. Now that was that was right before class, but
Okay.
but it looks like it's a baptizanto in the TR.
Oh, well, let's see. Is there a letter in front of that? I don't have that.
Oh,
let me
I'm
get
sorry,
that.
that's wrong. That's in gamma, not alpha.
Yes. Oh, yes, yes. So unless there was a variant between the Nessel-Allen text and the received text, I didn't put anything in there. So that, yes, for gamma, there is a difference in the verse. This first sentence is actually a Mounce made up sentence. And I actually think the reason, I can't read Mounce's mind, but I wouldn't be surprised if he made it up specifically to make you realize, oh, I need to think about whether this new is a movable new or whether it is the actual ending. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if this thing that tripped us up here is specifically why he gave you the sentence. And now that you thought about this, it will help you if you see something like that again. All right, any other questions on Hayes? All right, let's try Dua.
Daimonia Paula Exabalon. And I translated that they were casting out many demons.
All right, they were casting out many demons. Nai e u.
Ooh.
Ooh? Oh, okay. Why?
I was casting out many demons.
I was casting out many demons. Okay. Okay, so one person says they were casting out many demons. The other one says I was casting out many demons.
It could
So
be
which one
either
is it?
one. Either one works.
Oh, it could be either one.
We know it's not
Okay.
the movable new because there's no epsilon.
Ah, Yuga, yeah, yes. Good job. Yeah, so there's an Omicron here. So this means this is either that first singular or third plural form. It's not third singular. That would be exebalen if it was a movable new. And so, yeah, so it could be either one. So this would actually be I was casting out or they were casting out many demons. And just in, this is actually from Marcon Hex Deca Tress. So Mark 6:13. And if you looked at Mark 6:13, the context would show you which it is. But just with these three words, you don't have enough context to tell. So if this is all you have, it could be either they were casting out many demons or I was casting out many demons.
Yeah, I went with they because I don't foresee any sane person claiming I was casting out many demons, but
Well, I mean, in the first century, you know, it's very possible. If Paul lays hands on you, you go somewhere, you just kick him out. It'd be great. It's good stuff.
yeah, but
Not
Paul
as good as
didn't go
having a
around
complete
bragging about
Bible,
it.
but it's still really good stuff to cast out all the demons. So, all right. So yeah. So I could see basically a contextual argument about the demons being cast out, but it could be either one. Yeah. So they were casting out, or I was casting out many demons. All right. Any questions on Duam? All right. Let's go to Trace.
Trace. I said they were being baptized by him.
Can you read it in Greek?
Oh yes, I'm supposed to do that, aren't I? Baptizanto hoop autu.
Tizanta hoop autu. All right. And what was your translation?
They were being baptized by him.
They were being baptized by him. Okay. Agathos e kakos.
Agathos.
Agathos. All right, you got it. And I think in the student notes that the thing I handed out, really there should be like a ... here, because in the TR there's a different word order. And the overall majority read with the TR, while about 1% of manuscripts follow the critical text, the Nessel-Allen text. So there should be a ... but this, I mean, it's still the same thing. So Yuga, very good.
I have a
So
question.
that's Trace. Yes, question.
Concerning that, the hoop and the TR, it just upsilon rho or upsilon p, or we hoop, and I'm assuming this is Nestle Allen. It's hoopo. It has the O is missing, or the omicron is missing, because
Okay.
it has the
Apostrophe.
what do you call it, the apostrophe. What's
All
the
right.
difference? In other words,
Okay.
what's the difference between the TR and the Nestle Allen reading?
Okay. So here's Mark 1:5 in the TR and in critical text, Nestle Allen text. So here we have ebaptidzanta, and you've got Pontus ento Jordane, all in the Jordan River, hoop autu. So that's why there's really a ... The Nestle Allen text has ebaptidzanta. It still has the ento Jordane patamo in the Jordan River, but the hoop autu is moved to right after the ebaptidzanta. So actually the hoop is exactly the same. The hoop autu is exactly the same. It's just a word order difference. So
Okay,
why does it
looks
say hoop
different.
instead of hoopa?
The omicron was contracted because of the vowel autu, the alpha.
Yuga, yes. It's because it's followed by the autu.
The apostrophe just looks different on the email that you sent, the TR. It looks like it's moved, but it doesn't on your screen there.
Oh, yeah. I think that's probably just some kind of font issue if it made it look different.
Yeah,
It's
probably.
Yeah. So I like the Accordance Greek font. It's a nice Greek font. It used to be where if you didn't have Accordance, it would look like garble, but then they changed it to a Unicode font. And so now even I think if somebody doesn't have Accordance, it'll still show up as Greek characters instead of changing it to garble. So that's definitely a nice feature.
Yeah, I'm really learning to like Accordance.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. All your friends, keep them in business. I think they compete against Logos because it's like they're the more scholarly one in a certain way. Like the more original language exegesis you kind of do, I use Accordance for that. But Logos has so many more books, and I think they have a much bigger staff. So it's kind of like a David and Goliath type situation. And Logos is a very useful program, but I'm glad that Accordance is still there to give Logos competition. So
yeah, I started using the first Bible software I used was Olive Tree. So I've actually never used Logos. I went from Olive Tree to Accordance. That's quite the upgrade.
Yes, I'm sure that was. I mean, free is good. Like eSword, free is good. But there are sometimes when you pay for things, they do end up getting better sometimes. All right, let's go to Thesaurus.
Erakonto pros auton. They were come unto him.
Okay, Erakonta pros auton. You said they were come to him, I think. Is that right?
They were come unto him.
They were come unto him. Okay. Naiu.
I said they were coming unto him, or they were coming to him.
So they were coming versus they were come.
Come completed action, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, I got they were coming as well.
They were coming versus they were come. Yeah. So can you give me an argument for the one or the other? We're coming or versus we're come?
Well, if
We're
it's
coming
passive,
continues
go
with the ongoing thought rather than it being perfect, the imperfect idea. So they were coming is probably a better translation.
Yes, that is a good point. So the imperfect has that ongoing action in the past. It's like a line in the past instead of a dot. Like they were come to him sounds like a dot, which is more what you'd expect for an aorist. So yes, so I would say that they were coming would be better because you get that, it gives you that ongoing action idea. So so they were coming to him. Or unto him is fine. They were coming to him. Can you give me the parsing of erchanta, please?
Third person plural, passive, imperfect indicative.
Okay, third person plural passive indicative
Yeah.
or middle passive indicative. Okay.
Mhm.
Oh, and what's the lexical form, please?
I don't know.
No. Okay. Anybody want to give a little help here? Lexical form?
I would say Erikamai.
Erkamai, which means I come. Okay.
Because I think of that kind of like here I come, Erikamai.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's a helpful way to remember it. All right. Okay, Erkamai, here I come. I like that. That's good. All right, so that lexical form, is Erkamai normal or is it deponent?
Deponent.
Deponent. Okay, so it's deponent. So if it's deponent, this
It's active
one,
even though it doesn't look like it.
oh, it's active in meaning. It's active in meaning, even though it's got that. And I think you translate it. I mean, it's hard to make come like a passive idea. There's probably some way to do it, but so it's got an active meaning, but the form is middle form. And so since it's the lexical form is Erkamai, you could say that it's imperfect, middle deponent indicative, third plural from Erkamai. All right, you go. Why did the epsilon at the front change to an eta?
Because it made it past tense and it lengthened.
Okay, yeah. So there's two types of augments. Can anyone tell me the name of this type of augment? What are the two types of augments in 2110?
When it starts with a consonant, it's going to put an epsilon in front of it. And when it starts with a vowel, it's going to elongate the beginning vowel, but I don't know the names of it.
Yuga, that is right. So here's our augment. Type of augment, ways it augments. So if it begins with a consonant, the augment's an epsilon. And that's kind of the easy one. You just assume you got yourself an epsilon. So there we go. If it's a single vowel, then the vowel lengthens. And this is called a temporal augment. It tells you that somewhere in this paragraph, it's called a temporal augment. So
Oh, it's in the comments on the bottom of page 185. I see it.
Okay, good. So there we are, footnote 5. This is called a temporal augment because it takes longer to say the word with a long vowel. So agapao became agapone. And so here you've got your temporal augments and what they do. So both alpha and epsilon, you get yourself an eta instead. You got it. All right, so that's why it's erkanta instead of 2 epsilons or something like that. All right, you got any other questions on thesaurus?
Oh, is there a name for the type of augment for letter C when the verb begins with a diphthong?
That's a good question. Is there a specific name for the type of augment? I don't think that it has its own special name. You do have it lengthening. So if it lengthens, you probably could say it's a temporal augment because it also takes longer. And then the other one is syllabic augment, is where when the normal one, where you just stick the epsilon in the front. So it begins with a consonant. If the diphthong doesn't change, would you call it a temporal augment if it doesn't change at all? Doesn't show the augment? Probably not. So I'm not aware of any special name for it. So I guess you can just call it an augment. So you can call the normal one with just one consonant a syllabic augment, and you can call, if it begins with a single vowel, a temporal augment. If it begins with a diphthong, I guess you just call it an augment.
And then if the diphthong doesn't change, you just know it's past tense because of the context?
If the diphthong doesn't change, then context would certainly be very helpful. So over here with the diphthongs, if it doesn't change, you don't have that clue in the front necessarily, but you still have the secondary ending versus the primary ending. So here, heurisco is present tense, and it's got primary endings, okay? While heuriscon has that new at the end. It's a secondary ending. And so that still is giving you something else. It's not really, well, is this present tense? Is this imperfect tense? I really can't tell. Maybe the augment isn't telling you, but you still have the endings that will let you know. That's a good question, though. And I think you can see why, when you already have an epsilon on the front, they're not going to want to put two epsilons on it. And I guess it just, the Greeks must just not have wanted to say you and change it to an ew. So I guess that didn't sound good to them, so they didn't do it to us sometimes. All right, that was a good question. Any other questions before we go to penta? All right, let's do penta.
Ook econometha, we were being judged. No,
Okay,
we were
ook.
not being judged.
Okay, ook econometha, we were not being judged. Versus we were being judged. Okay, we were not being judged. Nai eu.
Ooh.
Ooh, okay, why?
Because that's not what the answer key said.
Not what the answer
I
key
got
said.
it. I got it wrong too. I said they were not judging.
They were not
But the-
judging.
But the
He
answer
had
key.
two answers.
Oh, did it? No, I only wrote down one of them, so maybe you did get it right.
So what did the answer key say? What did you put down from the answer key?
I said we were not judging for ourselves. That's what
We
the
were
answer
not
key.
judging for ourselves. Okay, so the answer key said both we were not being judged and we were not judging for ourselves. Does anybody know the difference between the two? If you do, then you are doing super well because you actually wouldn't necessarily know why it would have both of those yet.
On the table for 2114, metha is listed as the middle passive ending for first person plural in both the primary and secondary tenses.
Okay. Okay, so what is the hint? What are you saying there? These two different, we were not judging for ourselves versus we were not being judged.
So we were not being judged would be imperfect active indicative, whereas we were not being judged would be imperfect passive. No, it's not active versus passive. They're both passive.
Oh, it's not active versus passive. Why isn't it active versus passive?
Because active has main, not metha.
Ah, yes, you guys. So the active has main. I think you were looking at the chart across this way, probably.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the metha is both the primary middle passive and the secondary middle passive ending, but this is secondary. So the difference is actually that we were not judging for ourselves is actually giving that a middle sense. While we were not being judged is a passive sense with which we're familiar. So the middle voice, if it's not deponent, reflects back on the person in a certain way. So somehow comes back on himself. Okay, that's the sense of the middle when it's not deponent. And so the we were not judging for ourselves is giving it a middle sense, but and the answer key is giving you a correct translation, but there's no way that you would know that yet because you haven't learned the middle voice. I think chapter 25. So we were not being judged is definitely what you could be expected to know at this point. That is it. Agathos, we were not being judged. Okay, any questions on penta? That makes sense? Oh, by the way, how do you know that ekrinometha is not deponent on penta?
Because it's the lexical form is crino.
You got. Lexical form has the omega and not the my. You got. All right, let's go to hex.
Agar epistuita mosi pistuisata emoi.
Okay, and then here
For-
there is a TR difference, so it's not the biggest in the world. What's the difference between this in the critical text and in the received text? If you have the sheet there. Ioane Pente Hex Kai Tesseraconta.
Oh,
546.
Mose versus Mosey.
Yes, it's Mose in the TR versus Mouse in the critical text. Not the most doctrinally transformative variant, but the Mouse over here has got about 1% of Greek manuscript support. The overwhelming majority either read Mose, like the received text, or Mose with an epsilon iota at the end, which is what the Hodges Farstad majority text reading is. But they're very similar in their support. And the TR spelling Mose fits with the Moses of the previous verse having an eta. So again, not the hugest difference in the world, but no reason to think that the text that God allowed to get in the print edition, Mose, is not correct. Okay, so exactly the same parsing. Go ahead, Tim, give me the translation for this one, please.
Translation is, for if you were believing Moses, you are believing in me.
Okay, for if you were believing Moses, you were believing me.
I said you are believing in me.
You are believing me. So if you were believing Moses, you are believing me. Okay, naiu.
Nigh. No,
Nigh.
ooh. Nay, ooh.
I say ooh.
Ooh. Because it gives his own translation as a new. Okay,
Yes.
why?
Because it shouldn't be you are believing in me, because it's passive. Right? That's you are is active.
Okay, so he says it shouldn't be you are believing because episteuta is passive. What do you think? We better just parse the verbs here. So the first verb, the episteuta, what is the parsing of episteuta?
Second person plural middle imperfect indicative.
Okay, second person plural imperfect middle indicative is what he said. Autophos. Agathos or kakos?
I don't think that's active.
I think that's active. Okay, how do we know
Well,
which
middle
one it is?
would have an ending of esta, sigma,
Aha.
epsilon.
Yuga. So we've got the te, and we've got our epsilon connecting vowel, and then you have a te. And so the secondary active endings are nu sigma nothing, mente nu. Nu sigma nothing, mente nu. And then the secondary passive endings are main saw ta metha esta nta.
I'm sorry.
Ta metha esta nta.
Yeah, that's right. I'm looking at this wrong.
Aha. So this is active. So imperfect active indicative second plural. So how would you translate just that verb on its own? Pistuo as imperfect active indicative second plural.
You were believing?
Yeah, you were believing when it's plural. So you were believing, you were believing. So if you were believing Moses, and this pistiuseta, what is the parsing of pistiuseta?
It would be second person. Lexical form is pistuo.
Lexical form is pistuo. Okay, you got.
So yeah, that
Second
would be
person, because you've got that te ending. Does the te ending tell you if it's primary or secondary?
No.
No. But does it have an augment at the front?
No.
No, it does not have an augment.
No augment. So that means it's not secondary. So it's primary.
I translated it, I thought it was future, or I treated it as future anyway when I translated it.
Okay, why? What's the sign of the future?
The sign would be there's that sigma before the epsilon tau.
Oh, sigma. Okay.
Sigma is to indicate
Pistiuseta.
future.
Okay, so what would be the complete parsing then?
Second person plural, future, active indicative.
Okay,
Lexical form pistuo.
you get. And so what would this word on its own with no context, how would you translate?
I translate you would believe.
You
will be.
would believe. Now,
I think
You will
you will believe, but context that sounded weird, so I went with would.
okay, yeah. So just on its own, ye will believe, or y'all will believe, or you will believe is what you would expect. Why do you think the answer key said would believe?
Well, I translated it as you would believe because the first part, you were doing something. It just logically made sense to me that would be the second half of the statement instead of will.
Yuga, yeah. So it's kind of an if then. If the fancy way of saying it is like this is the protasis, the if part, and this is kind of like the apodosis, the then part. So with that context, I think that's why the answer key said would believe. But saying if you were believing Moses, you will believe me would be very reasonable, especially since you haven't learned anything about conditional clauses yet. So very reasonable to say if you were believing Moses, you will believe me. If you just looked at the answer key and said, okay, it says you would believe, you'd want to realize it's saying would because there's this if at the front, the A, and then this is like the then part of the clause. So we're saying it's like would like that, but you'd want to know that this is future and not just say would because it kind of sounds right. So yes, so that is good. And that's why the answer key says would, but certainly will would be reasonable. Though it does sound a little strange to say, if you were believing Moses, you will believe me. But, yes. So on the back, on the references in the workbook, when he gives all of the references at the end, if it's in these brackets, it means it's similar to John 5:46, but it's not John 5:46. And so he adjusted the verse a little bit, and he's letting you know that he did that. And the same thing with the 1 Corinthians 11:31 here. Well, the other ones are actual unadjusted text. So yeah, that's why that future tense is not actually in John 5:46. Okay. Any questions on hex? All right, let's try hepta.
Elale autois ton logon. Logon. They were speaking the word to them.
Elale autois ton logon. They were speaking the words to them. Okay, naeu. Ooh, okay. Why?
I thought the verb was third person singular instead of third person plural.
Okay, third person singular versus third person plural. All right, what would the parsing of elale be? Anyone who wants to, go ahead and give me the parsing of elale.
Well, it's going to be imperfect active indicative.
Okay.
Like I said third person singular.
Okay.
Does that come from Lego in the lexical form?
Okay, it's a third person. So yeah, let's figure out a lexical form. So Lego is the present tense stem. If it's imperfect, does the imperfect have the same stem as the present tense, except you stick that augment on the front and stuff on the back and different things like that? So here we have this two lambdas. You have the lol. So that doesn't really look like Lego to become lol. Laleo. Oh, okay. A laleo. And what does laleo mean?
I was saying.
Kind of similar to Lego. There's certainly semantic overlap, but laleo. So there's our laleo. I say speak. And this is page 145. So that was lesson 17. Good contract verb, laleo. There's a lot of speaking going on in the Bible, 296 times. So elalun is our imperfect. Laleso is our future. Our present, of course, is laleo. And laleo, is it a contract verb in the contract verb chapter? How do contract verbs end? What do lexical forms end for contract verbs?
Alpha, omega, epsilon, omega, or omicron, omega.
Yuga. So it's either ending in alpha omega, epsilon omega, or omicron omega. Does this one end in one of those?
Yeah, epsilon omega.
Yes. So this is a contract verb. So laleo. Okay. So it's gonna. So in the imperfect, this elalun, this is going to be like what the contract verbs do at the end of in 21.22. So it's going to do the same thing as the poieo in 21.22. So these are our poieo. You have epoiun, epoies, epoie, epoiumen, epoiete, epoiun. And then the middle passives, epoiumen, epoiu, epoieta, epoiumetha, epoieste, epoiunta. So with that, what does this elale look like?
Third person singular.
Looks like a good third person singular. So what would the complete parsing be for elale?
Third person singular, middle passive, imperfect.
No, it'd be active.
Or
It's
active,
active, not middle passive.
Active.
Yeah, no middle passive. Middle passives are down here. Those are the main sata, metha, estha, unta. So middle passive would be elaleta. Okay, like epoieta. It's not elaleta. It is up here, like
Yeah, I
epoie.
keep looking at my chart wrong.
Yes. Well, better to find out now. You're looking at the chart wrong before you spend a lot of time memorizing, and then you realize, oh, I was looking at it wrong. So
Yeah.
better figure out now. Searching for the hidden treasure, and it's holding the map upside down the whole time. Oh, no. Yeah. My wife and I went on a beautiful hike. There's lots of beautiful places to hike out here. And it's said on little directions we had that the place where you started the hike was kind of hard to find. And so we saw this trail going off. Like, well, that must be the beginning of the hike. So we went off, and it's really beautiful. You could see the Pacific Ocean, really, really beautiful. But it didn't really compare with what the hike thing said we were supposed to do. And we realized after we'd gone quite a way, this is just some path that somebody just made. It's a nice thing. And so we were completely lost, but we kind of knew where we came from. So we just headed back that way, and we ended up catching the trail after a while. But we have to go back there and conquer the hike some other time because we spent a lot of time on this very nice detour. But yeah, so it's better to find out sooner rather than later. And then we got back to the place where the cars were, oh, the trail starts on the other side and there's a sign. Oh, look at that. So anyway, so it's good to find out now that you're looking at the chart wrong. So yeah, so the elale is...
You read Pilgrim's Progress, right?
I have read Pilgrim's Progress, and it's been a while. I know that people don't follow the signs, and it's not good when they do that. If you get off the narrow way to the celestial city.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the sign wasn't right on the trailhead. The sign right by where the trail started, it was just like about the mountain and whatever, and like the creatures that live there or whatever. You had to actually walk a little bit of a distance, and then there was a sign saying this is the trail. So it wasn't actually that obvious from the parking lot. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. So anyway, elale, what was the parsing for elale?
Third person singular, imperfect active indicative.
Third person singular, imperfect active indicative from laleo, meaning
he was speaking.
He was speaking, yes. So he was speaking the
word to them.
You got it. He was speaking the word to them. Mark on dua. One thing that I think can encourage you with the imperfect is, since Greek has an imperfect for this ongoing action and the aorist for snapshot action, that's actually, we don't have in English two different past tenses like that. So it's a nice bit of specificity that can be exegetically significant in the New Testament. All right, so that was hepta. Any questions on hepta? You know, if you're nice and warm now, let's go to the real thing, to haste.
Ekenos de elegen peri to vau to somatos autu. And I pronounced it, but he was speaking concerning the temple of his. I had to look up the last word that was body. So, but he was speaking concerning the temple of his body.
But he was speaking concerning the temple of his body. Have you learned soma yet? I can't remember now.
Yes.
Body.
Yeah, I learned it and then forgot it from not studying
Forgot
everything.
Well, I
Soma
forgot.
Christou, the body
feel
of
bad.
Christ. Great, great phrase to remember, the Soma Christou. And it's bodies are local and visible, and the body of Christ is local and visible. Each local assembly is the body of Christ. What a blessing. Just like the church is called the temple of God. Temples are local and visible. And the church is called Christ's bride, and brides are local and visible. Mine is, at least. So yes, so this is good. But he was speaking concerning the temple of his body. Agathos e kakos.
Agathos.
Agathos. All right. Yuga. Now, this first, well, let's parse elegant first. What is the parsing of elegant?
Lexical form is Lego. That would be first person singular
Or third person plural.
or third person plural. Imperfect active indicative.
Okay, imperfect active indicative, first person singular or third person plural. Nai eu. New on the end. What's right before that?
Epsilon.
Epsilon, not an omicron. Ooh, okay. So how does that
Third
affect
person
things?
singular.
It is third person singular, and that is a movable nu that is moved right on. So elegant. What would the first person singular or third person plural look like?
Elegon.
Omicron nu.
Elegon. Omicron nu. Yuga. That would be elegon. This is elegant. All right, Yuga. And what's the subject of elegant here?
Akanos.
Akanos. Yuga. What's your default for akanos? Is it he?
Usually that, isn't it?
This or that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. This or that, or just that?
I thought it was that.
That.
This or these.
Akanos
That.
is the far demonstrative. What's the near demonstrative?
Chauta?
Hutos.
Hutos.
Tautas plural. Yeah. So akanos is that. Hutos is this. But sometimes Mounce gives you a footnote. He said, did you notice that a demonstrative is functioning as a personal pronoun and is more apparent if you can remember the context? So sometimes akanos, that, can be reduced to a lesser, more like a personal pronoun instead of a demonstrative pronoun. So like the King James, it's not just Mounce that get in the answer key, he was speaking of the temple of his body. Here the King James says he as well, instead of, that one was speaking concerning the temple of his body. And this is BBG 13.9 talks about this. There he says, so sometimes the demonstrative pronoun weakens in its force and functions as a personal pronoun. So hutos estin megas kai huios subsistu clay thesitai. Instead of this one will be great, just as he will be great. As you might have guessed, there's overlap among the article, the personal pronoun, and the demonstrative pronoun. So sometimes hutos and akanos can simply be he, she, or it, versus that one for akanos or this one for hutos. And this is an instance where the context would support simply having it as he was speaking concerning the temple of his body. All right, Yuga, right, the temple, because all the fullness of the Godhead is dwelling in him bodily. And he, of course, is going to be replacing the Old Testament temple, fulfilling it. He is the fulfillment of the Old Testament temple. All right, one other thing I wanted to point out is, I'm sure you've noticed, maybe you didn't think about it that much, but like the King James doesn't capitalize pronouns for deity. And so if I'm writing an essay on something, I'm going to capitalize pronouns for deity, but I won't do it in my translations of scripture. And the reason the King James doesn't do it is because there isn't a distinction of that kind in the original text. So the Greek doesn't do it. The Hebrew doesn't do it. And when you decide to capitalize or not capitalize, you are making an interpretive decision. Now, obviously, the Apostle John, who said this, believed Jesus was God. But let's say it's some person speaking to Christ. If we capitalize or not capitalize, now we're making an exegetical decision about whether this person thought Jesus was God. And we might be right, we might be wrong, but that isn't a translational decision. That's an interpretive decision. All right, so that's why the King James doesn't capitalize the deity pronouns. I think it's a good reason. All right, any comments, questions on haste? All right, let's go to duo.
All right. Kai pos ha aklos erketo pros auton kai edidasken autus. And I translated that as, and all the crowd was coming unto him, and he was teaching them.
All right, and all the crowd was coming to him, and he was teaching them. Nai eu.
I would say nigh, but I had to look in the lexicon, and I'm not sure I still entirely understand why pos would be all instead of every.
Okay, all instead of every. So he talks about pos here. In 10.22, he gives you all the forms. He says it is a good paradigm to memorize. Helps you with learning participles. Adjective. It's usually in a predicate position modifying a noun, even though it's an adjective.
Because the answer key said the whole multitude. And I went digging in the lexicon and was able to find one of the translations there in the lexicon, like a column and a half into the explanation.
Right, I memorized pos as each, every, all.
Yeah, so here, Mounce tells you each, every for the singular, and then the plural, he says all. So what's the parsing of pos here? Is it singular or is it plural?
Pos would be singular in the masculine.
Yeah, pos is singular, and it was going to agree with aklos, and aklos is obviously singular masculine. Even if you weren't confused, you got that nice article, which is your friend, right? So, so yeah, so it's nominative singular, so that's going to be significant.
How did you translate it, Jody?
So I translated it every multitude, but the answer key said the whole multitude. And I was able to find that digging in the lexicon, but it was like a column and a half into every possible translation of pos.
Oh, were you looking at BDAG?
I was the big lexicon.
Yeah, probably BDAG.
I put it as all, but I think it's more so because I was looking at the English term crowd or multitude, where it's a collective noun. So even though it's describing a whole lot of people, it's like one group. And so you wouldn't say like it's things you can't count, like not every peanut butter, but all of the peanut butter. And treating it as one group, even though it's plural when you break it down.
Yeah.
One crowd,
pos,
all the crowd.
You know, when you're learning definitions of words in BBG, so you just have for pos this very simple one-word definition, each, every, and then he says plural, all. But notice he also tells you it occurs 1,244 times. Okay, so when you look up pos in BDAG, in your big lexicon, you will see that there's a lot more to it than than just that one word definition. It can mean a lot of things, and one of them is whole. That is in there. It's in this big definition somewhere.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
marked at number 4 on page 783.
Okay.
Almost at the end of 783.
Okay, Billy, we have
The last
1, we
paragraph.
have 2, we have 3. 4 is marker of completeness, whole.
There in
So
B.
we shouldn't be surprised that if a word occurs over 1,200 times, it can mean more than just one little tiny thing, and there can be a real big definition lexicon. That shouldn't surprise us. But obviously, you're not going to memorize that huge thing for pos. So I would say, based on your level of Greek expertise, there's multiple ways you could do it. Crowd also is a word that in English kind of each crowd. It
Yeah,
just
that's-
like,
Yeah, because I looked up pos because I didn't remember. It said each or every. And it's like, well, each or every multitude just sounds weird, but
yeah,
that's what it says in the back, so I rolled with it.
yeah. And
So-
each multitude would not be wrong. Each crowd would be fine. But the reason he said the whole crowd, or all, if you said all the crowd or the whole crowd or each crowd, just because of the nature was like on a test, I would be fine with that for any of those. Because the way the Greeks say this is a little bit different than maybe we would say it. But the idea is that the whole crowd is coming. And if you'd get that sense if you've seen pos, 50 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, as you get used to reading it out of those 1,244 times in the New Testament, you're going to see some of that flexibility to the word. So the whole crowd, each multitude, all the multitude or crowd, that I think I could see any of that for the pos.
So I don't get the merits for using dynamic equivalence. It's good.
Well, yeah, it's. I wouldn't say this is dynamic equivalence. This is the difference between a 2-word definition of a little, very bite-sized definition and the big, more detailed definition in something like BDAG.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. What's the parsing for erchita?
Third person plural. Imperfect active indicative.
Can you give me a lexical form?
Is that there? My
Yeah.
Yes,
So
sir.
third person.
Let's second guess myself.
Okay, so we have here third person. I think you said third person plural imperfect active indicative of erchomai. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, naeu.
It'd be middle, right?
Okay, why?
Because it's definite.
Okay, it's the deponent. So the lexical form is that erchomai.
Oh.
And so it's going to have those secondary middle passive endings. So erchita, main sa ta metha esta nta are the endings we're going to be looking at, not nu sigma nothing men ten nu. So active is going to be a problem. It's not going to be active. It's going to be middle deponent. Okay, so active in meaning, but middle in form. Keeping that in mind, what would the parsing be?
Third person middle active indicative.
Third person singular or plural?
Singular.
Third person singular, middle deponent imperfect indicative. From erchomai to come or go. Yes, so it is imperfect middle deponent indicative, third person singular from erchomai to come or go. And what does it mean here?
What's coming?
Yeah. So each multitude, the whole multitude, all the multitude, the crowd was coming to him. So it's like you could see them coming. Here they come. And how about the didasken? Can you parse the ed didasken?
Third person singular middle active indicative.
Third person singular, middle active indicative. Okay, lexical form.
Didaskalos? No, that's teacher. Didas.
It's related. Related.
Didasco?
Didasco, yeah. By the way, that you just illustrated how it can be helpful to keep in the language. Because by calling me didaskalos Ross, it helps you remember that didasco means to teach.
And now that I know that it's Didasco, it's plural. It's third person plural because of the en. Or for Didasco, there's an omega, right?
Plural is going to have an omicron instead of an epsilon,
Or yeah, omicron.
but that's an epsilon, so it's going to make it singular instead of plural.
So is this new, the ending, or is it a movable new?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Okay.
It's movable.
It's the movable new, because if you look at 2114, here, it's got a new at the end, so that's not a middle passive ending, it's an active ending. The new could be one of these endings, or it could be this movable new. How can you tell whether it's this ending or the movable new? What's the difference in that way on the word?
One has an epsilon, the other one has an omicron.
You got the connecting vowel. So if it's got an omicron connecting vowel, then you've got yourself a first person singular or third person plural. If it's got an epsilon, then you've got yourself a third person singular. So on this one, the didasken, which is
it's either third person singular. Yeah.
It is third person singular because of that epsilon. You got it. All right. So what would be the complete parsing of a didasken then?
Third person singular. Imperfect active indicative.
Third person singular, imperfect active indicative from
Didasco.
Didasco, meaning?
I teach.
Yeah, I teach, or I mean, lexical. It's I teach or to teach. To teach is the is the infinitive, but we say in English in the dictionary we do it that way. But yes, I teach is the form. So you guys, so that is an imperfect active indicative, third person singular from Didasco. I teach, and so the whole crowd, all the multitude was coming to him, and he was teaching them. Okay, any comments, questions on dua? Well, we didn't finish, but I'm not super surprised that we didn't finish. So, Lord willing, next time we will continue to go through the workbook, and that will be really good. And with the way that I have it, so that we're doing both each chapter workbook and then doing those review ones from the track 2, I think the track 2, because it's further back, there's no fog there anymore. I think we're going to go through those quite quickly. And so I don't know how long it's going to take, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's significantly faster than these new ones, where we still have some of that stuff behind me, namely fog. So good job for getting to where you are here. Before we close, do you have any comments or questions?
Do we, since we're going to be finishing up this chapter next week, do we need to go ahead and have chapter 16 of track 2 also completed before next class?
We're not likely to finish this and all of that, but I would at least be ready with the 16, because if we do finish all of this, then you're at least ready to go for that. So I would please try to do that. Though the likelihood that we're going to finish all of this chapter and that one next time is not especially great, unless all the rest of these you really are very, very speedy with just perfect answers, which, you know, is possible. Anything is possible. So good question. Any other questions?
I'm still imperfect, so
yeah. So now you could say, I mean, you have to remember that, you know, the imperfect tense. You can say, my Greek was imperfect, I was tense. I mean, this is really how I was feeling. So, all right, well, let's read 2 Corinthians 13:14. Te charis tu Kyriou Jesu Christou, kai he agape tu theou, kai he koinonia tu hagiou pneumatos, et pontitumon. Amen.